episode 498 of 360 Wrestling Fanatic. I will be talking about tonight's Impact 1000 Part 2, celebrating 1000 episodes of Impact Wrestling. And once again, I'm going to be talking about all the huge WWE news that took place today, or at least I'm going to try to remember all of it to talk about. There's been so many of it today. Right here, right now, 360 Wrestling Fanatic. Hi there, Wrestling Fanatics. Welcome back once again to another episode of 360 Wrestling Fanatic. I am your host, Lance Brock, and I am sure everyone is probably sick and tired of hearing me by now. This actually is the fifth 360 Wrestling podcast released today. Probably the record for most podcasts I have put out in one day. And in case maybe you've been living under the rock, but not the Rock, Dwayne Johnson, but I know that was a bad joke there. I apologize for that. I started this morning walking to work like usual. I recorded Good Morning Wrestling Fans, and then just a little bit after I got there, I saw the news that starting next October 2024, that Friday Night SmackDown will be leaving Fox and going back to USA for, I believe, $1.4 billion as a part of a 5-year deal. And just a little bit after that, saw that USA maybe could be losing Raw and NXT as well next October. And then I decided to come on here on Spreaker real quick and do that quick little breaking news thing. And then after that, the pro wrestling news just started coming and coming all day today. Releases coming off of the main roster and NXT as well. I will talk about all the releases, but first, real quick, I want to get into Impact Wrestling 1000, Part 2 of the 1000th episode of Impact Wrestling was tonight on Access TV. I apologize in advance for this not being quite a full recap, but I did watch the show on Access TV tonight, and this episode of Impact Wrestling, Impact 1000, was taped in White Plains, New York, our commentators tonight, Tom Hannafin and Matthew Raywalt. We start things off with the high-flying, death-defying Ultimate X match. Probably the one match that is the signature match of TNA/Impact Wrestling. And we have former Dark Order member 5, Alan Angels, in this one, taking on Ace Austin, Speedball Mike Bailey, Rich Swann, Zachary Wentz, and Samurai Del Sol, formerly known as Kalisto in WWE. This one, really good match, and it was pretty much what you would expect from Ultimate X. A lot of high-flying excitement, and there was this one point, all the guys were on the floor, all by the one structure, and Rich Swann, and I want to say maybe Samurai Del Sol and Alan Angels were on the steel structure, and they did a triple moonsault off the structure onto the 3 guys on the floor. That was very impressive. This goes on to be a very exciting match, and surprisingly, I maybe consider this an upset. It was won by Alan Angels, and I have to admit, I was thinking maybe Speedball Mike Bailey, maybe Rich Swann win this one. Was not expecting Alan Angels. In our next match, we have Jake Something taking on Dirty Dango. And for this one, but first, Ultimate X, I'll give that 3 out of 5 ring bells. Our next match now, Jake Something taking on Dirty Dango. I have to admit, for this one, I thought it was really cool. It was for this one match only, but they brought back the Fox Box. In case you're not familiar with what the Fox Box is, I'm sure everyone knows, watching sports, they usually have the scoreboard on the screen with the time, what quarter, what period, whatever it is. And then when Impact started in 2004, when it was on Fox Sports Net Friday afternoons, that was one thing that definitely separated it from any pro wrestling show that was on TV at the time, was that they had the Fox Box. I mean, there was no score or anything, but they had the names of the superstars in the match. And at the time, I want to say the singles matches were maybe 10 minutes. And then maybe if they were like a number one contenders match or something, there was more time. And then if there was a title match, there was more time allowed in the match. And they also had a news ticker down on the bottom of the screen as well. They also brought that back for tonight. I thought that was really awesome that they did that, even just for one match. And that was one good thing about these 2 weeks, celebrating the 1000th episode of Impact Wrestling, is that they celebrated the history of TNA / Impact Wrestling. Thought this was done very well. Next up, we have Team Canada being represented first by Eric Young with Coach D'Amore in his corner, taking on Kenny King with Sheldon Jean in his corner. This one does not last long at all. Eric Young getting the win over Kenny King via disqualification when Sheldon Jean interferes. But then we see the Deputy Director of Authority for Impact Wrestling, Shark Boy. He comes out. He does not want it to end like that. So he asks the fans if he wants them to turn it into a tag team match to give him a shell yeah. And of course, he gets a shell yeah from the crowd there in White Plains, New York. And now we have a tag team match. Team Canada, Showtime Eric Young, and Coach Scott D'Amore taking on Kenny King and Sheldon Jean. Once again, very quick, maybe even shorter than the first match. Ends in a disqualification when the design get involved. And then once again we see Shark Boy. He makes this an 8-man tag now, adding one of the top best tag teams in TNA Impact Wrestling history, former NWA World Tag Team Champions Wildcat Chris Harris and the Cowboy James Storm, America's Most Wanted. Team Canada and AMW get the win in this 8-man tag. I'll say 3 out of 5 ring bells. And next up, we have another really good match. The Walking Weapon, Josh Alexander, taking on Trey Miguel. Very good one here. Alexander gets the win. I'll have to give this one, I'd say 4 out of 5 ring bells. Quite an entertaining match here. And then it was time for our main event this week on Impact 1000. We have the current Impact Wrestling Knockouts Champion Trinity, Impact Wrestling Hall of Famer Gail Kim, Jordan Grace, Hardcore Country Mickey James, and another former Impact Knockouts champion and Impact Hall of Famer, Awesome Kong, along with Raisha Saeed, take on the team of representing the beautiful people, Angelina Love, along with Velvet Sky, the virtuosa Deanna Purrazzo, Giselle Shaw, Savannah Evans, and Tasha Steelz in a 10-knockout tag team match. I thought this match was... I'm definitely not going to say that it was a 5-star classic or anything, but it was a fun match for a fun show, and I'll give it 3 out of 5 ring bells. Like I said, going into it though, I wasn't expecting a 5-star classic, wasn't expecting Savage and Steamboat, but still a fun match. And that was tonight's part 2 of Impact 1000. I thought overall the 2 weeks of Impact Wrestling that we have seen were great. I haven't done this for a show yet, but I'm going to rate 2 weeks of it, and I'll give it 9 out of 10 ring bells. That's just my opinion. Like I kind of talked about yesterday with the match ratings, and those are just my opinions. Not a lot of people might like them. who knows, maybe everybody hates the ratings I give, but that's just what I feel about the match, just my opinion, not hurting anybody. And you can feel free to give whichever match and whichever rating you want to. And now on to the big news that came out today. And there was definitely a lot of it. And that big news is, I already mentioned SmackDown going back to USA next year after leaving Fox. Talked about that. It was also announced that the Elimination Chamber Premium Live event is going to be in Perth, Australia. The only bad thing about that is, here in North America, will probably be very early in the morning. If you remember earlier this year, when Impact did that Down Under tour, I believe it started at 5 a.m. here in the United States. So who knows what time that the Elimination Chamber is going to start. And then after that, the news started coming in about all of the releases. And maybe one of the saddest ones was Emma, real name Tennille Dashwood, when WWE announced the Elimination Chamber Premium Live event being in Australia. She was really excited. The PLE being in her home country. And then just a little bit after that tweet, or that X, whichever it's called now, was posted, they announced her release from the company. Also, Madcap Moss released Rick Boogs and a couple from NXT as well. We had Dana Brooke, Mansoor, Mace, Dabba-Kato, and Shanky, all released. Also, hopefully I'm not leaving too many out, but I have already mentioned Jasmine, or Aaliyah, I should say, most recently in WWE. I just more so knew her as Jasmine when she was here on the Indies. Like I talked about earlier, worked with her a little bit when I was working with Clash Wrestling. Saw her here in Michigan have battles with Leah Von Dutch, Silesia Sparks, and I have watched some of her matches on YouTube on the Indies in Canada, in the Toronto area. And probably the one release I have to admit that I might be maybe the most disappointed and the most upset about is actually probably Dolph Ziggler. I said this earlier when I did 360 Wrestling Fanatic on the walk home from work. He's probably one of my favorite wrestlers, actually. And in 2015, I met him, just talked to him for a few minutes, not much, but he did seem like a really nice guy. And that was actually on the day of an episode of Raw that was here in Detroit at Joe Louis Arena. Unfortunately, I did not make it to that show, was not able to, but that was a pretty memorable Raw. It was the episode that featured, at the time anyway, the return of Shane McMahon to WWE. I remember Raw, I want to say, kicked off that night with the surprise of the return of Shane McMahon after the first time he left WWE. But back to the Dolph Ziggler signing at the Cricket Wireless that day, I remember I brought a WWE calendar actually to have him sign. And when I showed it to him, put it on the table, he saw what month he was on, and the first thing that he said was, "I hate May." And I thought that was pretty funny. And like I said, even though I just talked to him just for a couple minutes real quick, definitely not best friends or anything. I wish we were, but yeah, he is a really nice guy. Seemed really nice. And with other people there too, he seemed really cool with everybody. And he had a big crowd. I got there early. Not as early as I would like to have. And I'm sure anyone around here in the Taylor, Michigan area knows the Cricket Wireless I'm talking about. There was already a long line wrapped around Rite Aid to the mailbox. Like I said, if you're from around here in Taylor, Michigan, I'm sure you know the area I'm talking about. But that was a good day. Dolph Ziggler, very nice to meet in person. And I'm sure that he will definitely have a bright future still in the wrestling business. Whether if he does go to AEW or even Impact. Sorry about that. I have been talking quite a bit today with all the podcasts and everything. But like I was saying, to go back to it about Dolph Ziggler, I'm sure anywhere he wants to go, whether if it's AEW, Impact Wrestling, MLW, NWA, maybe even Triple L in Mexico, or New Japan Pro Wrestling, I'm sure he could be a star. And I'm sure he's not listening to the podcast right now, but I definitely wish him the best in the pro wrestling business. And before I wrap up, I just want to mention one thing real quick, and that is actually Ryback's YouTube channel. Lately, he's been making some videos and stuff. Ryback versus WWE. So far, he has 5 parts. And actually, some things I do agree with him on. Some of the things, maybe he's stretching the truth a little bit. You never know. But like I said, the series that he is currently doing now, Ryback vs. WWE, he has 5 parts. A lot of it is him complaining about Vince McMahon. A lot about CM Punk, or Fragile Phil, as he calls him. And he did explain, though, the supposed backstage fight that was reported between him and Brock Lesnar. He cleared that up, told the truth about it. I'm not going to talk too much and go too much into it, but I recommend you check it out. the videos, they're available on Ryback's YouTube channel. If you want to check that out, you can go do that. And just one more thing about Impact real quick. It's been announced that this is going to be a really good one. Bound for Glory in October. We will see, I'm sure a lot of people consider this a dream match. Will Ospreay taking on Speedball Mike Bailey. And if that doesn't get you excited for it, I'm going to say it one more time. Will Ospreay versus Speedball Mike Bailey. I think if that match doesn't get you excited, you're not a real pro wrestling fan. Definitely looking forward for that one. That could steal the show right there. Bound for Glory. There's been a lot of great matches in the history of that pay-per-view, and I'm sure that will definitely be one more added to that list of top matches. And that is all for this episode of 360 Wrestling Fanatic. I apologize if I'm leaving any important news stories out. Like I said, this is actually the 5th podcast out today between Good Morning Wrestling Fans. I did that quick breaking news. The newest episode of Anything Goes was released today. I did 360 Wrestling Fanatic on the walk home from work. And then this episode of 360 Wrestling Fanatic now. I'm not complaining, but I definitely don't understand how John Pollock and Wei Ting do it from Post Wrestling. Probably, definitely one of, if not the best wrestling podcasts and podcasters out there. They're ones that are actually good at it, or not just good, but they're great at it. They're the best. And I know there are a whole lot of pro wrestling podcasts to listen to. There are good ones, there are great ones, and then there are terrible ones like mine. But I appreciate you listening to mine. And I think the thing with wrestling podcasts is that, yes, I know it's good to listen to the good ones, maybe even the great ones, but you should also listen to the bad podcasts too. Like mine, give the little guys a shot instead of all the famous wrestlers and celebrities, everybody coming out with podcasts that are already famous. Give the little guys like me a shot. The bad podcasts, I'm not going to mention any of them, but I have definitely listened to some podcasts that I have thought were pretty bad, and I have subscribed to them. So, us small podcasters need to support each other. And once again, that's all for this episode. I hope to be back first things first tomorrow morning for the Friday episode of Good Morning Wrestling Fans. I think that's the right day tomorrow. And tomorrow night, talking all about WWE Friday Night SmackDown and AEW Rampage. But you never know if there's going to be any breaking news, just like there was today. If there is anything real major, I might come on here on Spreaker during the day and talk about it. So, just to be on the safe side, stay tuned to 360 Wrestling Podcasts, wherever you listen to podcasts at. Remember, if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, You can leave your feedback on Impact 1000 or any of the 1 million pro wrestling news stories that came out today right here in the comment section on Spreaker, on YouTube, or whichever podcast website or podcast app, podcatcher, whatever you want to call it these days, wherever those young whippersnappers call them. You can leave them in the comment section, and I'll be back tomorrow for 360 Good Morning Wrestling Fans, the Friday episode. And who knows if there's any more breaking news. Could be back then too. Just stay tuned. But until then, I am Lance, and I am a wrestling fanatic.